I'd speak slightly different than what my colleagues have been trying, what you have been doing all the time. I think you hear me talking all the time about what private investors, what social entrepreneurs can do. I'll talk about, we feel, I'm part of public sector ADB, so we feel that there can be no growth of any institution unless government, we'll be talking about Asia, unless government steps in and makes regulation which enables the whole process. And ADB, when we go to Pakistan or we go to other countries, we will develop the enabling framework. Let me say what government should do. Government is in the business of delivering service to poor. There are more than 1 billion people who are underserved, and that area government has not been able to deliver them effectively and efficiently. And therefore, government, they leaned on NGO and other non-profit organizations. But again, once the grant goes away, they also vanish. So therefore, you need to have something which is sustainable, and there is a hope for social enterprise provides that hope. And we think that that hope is valuable, and we must take it forward. Let me say what sort of government, if you look at whole of this part of Asia, you don't have any single definition of what social enterprise the governments are not aimed at. You don't have a single unit which looks at social enterprise, what it is actually, how it can be helped, what are the requirements, and therefore government need to put such enterprise. Government has a maximum leverage, maximum reach. So it has to have some sort of public awareness campaign, develop a website, give information, give success stories to people, provide in the education department, have some sort of curriculum which helps people to understand what social enterprise is and what are things there. You should have, government can, if it sponsors a forum, just like what we see here in Singapore, such a nice, I mean this, because of this so many persons know about this, the whole social enterprise impact investment and all that. Therefore, government has to take a more proactive role in informing people what are these entities and what are their jobs they have to do. But if you look at most social enterprise at the lower end, you find there's a huge lack of capacity. And who will provide that capacity? Government has to look into how do they handhold those people, help them in understanding what are their problems, and give them capacity building. And we will work with government to have that capacity building process. Government can bring in, help them people to replicate those success stories and scale them up also. Also important, a lot of the people, the smaller microfinance or smaller social enterprise, we need to have. Biggest problem is finance is not available, and government can take risk. Government can through its system take risk, or you can also provide subsidy because you don't have so much profit. It can provide subsidy by tax break, which it does sometimes, or it provides incentives for investors to invest in it. I know in India there's a program in tax which allows, if you have a program for any social work, you get, if that's approved by government, that the whole amount of money invested in that is exempt from tax. But most people don't know. There's a complete information gap that such facilities are available. So you need to inform people that these facilities are there, and put them, make it systematically, put them these support to this growing organization, growing system, growing social entrepreneurs to sort of where they have missed out on profit, government can help them in providing those support, and that's the role of government. I think the previous session we were talking about, ADB is doing also trying to create a fund for different countries, and what they will do is that the private sector group is going to pick up some 1 million to 5 million, something like investment like that of social enterprise, where they will see as to what is the amount of, they have kept minimum profit as 10%, and they will hire a investment advisor who gives them the maximum return on social. They have developed a matrix, and they will see what's the development impact are there, and that's how they will become. The private sector is thinking of investing in private sector group of APPs, thinking of investing in private sector, and seeing that developmental impacts are the key issue.
Okay, probably some very specific examples from Roshan, and Michiel talked about Microsoft's role and $1 leading to $11, $13 impact. Very interestingly, just to provoke the audience to ask questions, when it comes to Microsoft, piracy also leads to fantastic developmental impacts, although not captured. When it comes to public services, the illegal services actually bleed the economy. Poor people actually pay far more for illegal services, unfortunately. So I think that's a very interesting paradox when it comes to services that are being offered to the people which the public sector is not able to offer. And we had Matthew explain about how IFC plays a role in being the bridge between the government and the private sector, and not really crowding the space out or not diminishing the private sector's entrepreneurial role, but really holding hands and creating an enabling environment. So we've had very rich discussions. I was talking to Doreen before the session started. I hope she's still around here, because the closing plenary is supposed to develop hopefully some concrete actions, and I hope this session can also try to contribute. So there are two ways you can discuss, is to ask questions or share your thoughts, or also deliberate on some concrete actions that we could together discuss, and then hopefully the rapporteur can take notes and then pass it on to the concluding panel. So over to you. Please have a show of hands, and we can have as many questions briefly, and then after.
Yeah, sure. My name is Robert van Heuvel, DSM Nutrition. I have a question to Microsoft. Thank you for the examples. And my question is, what was the most important role the government played or the public sector played? And second question is, how did you get the public sector in that role? What was most challenging?
So that's a great question. I think if you look at we have national plans in every country that we develop, and we map, of course, governments and officials that influence the direction of the industry in IT. So it's clearly in our interest to build relationships for future growth. We leverage many people in Microsoft as well as in our partner ecosystem to reach not just individuals, but to develop programs with them for their national agendas. So if that is education, which it typically is, then we have a whole slew of not just executives, but also programs that we can work on, saying, here's programs we did in Portugal or in Latin America that could be relevant in Indonesia. So we bring those to government officials, and they typically really like that. So it's not a typical approach of sales. It's much more of a create a true value proposition that's targeted with the policy. So we've dedicated teams to this that work with country organizations. It's a long process. It's not a 1-year cycle, clearly, right? This is multi-year, and this works outside of, if you want, normal P&L structures. We have separately funded public sector organization for that.
What was most challenging? Was that the long-term period of time?
I'll give you an example of what I've heard many times. Please give us a $100 device, a $100 computer that solves all our problems. People have specific ideas about a specific price point without understanding the economics in the supply chain that requires us to be successful, not just as Microsoft, as an implementation firm, as a hardware vendor, as a software company, as a government institution. So these are problems we run into when people have point solutions, and they stick to that. Of course, we're keen to develop solutions for the bottom of the pyramid, the rural communities, but these are sometimes challenges. Another challenge is, of course, respect for intellectual property. You want to develop a local economy, absolutely. This is a shared objective. There's a clear benefit to it. But the rule of law, transparency and corruption are vary greatly by country, and as a result, the enforcement of what is valuable as human capital is hard to enforce. It's really hard. So we need to create not just press about, you must comply with software regulations in order to pay for IP from a US company. That's not our approach at all. We are trying to create solutions and relationships to drag people to see that there is value being produced. So that's the slow route if you think about it, right? But the quick action of slap people on the finger and say you need to pay for software, that doesn't work. That we've tried that 20, 30 years ago. That's not what's working.
Hi, my name's Emma Tompkinson. I work for the New South Wales Government in Australia. And in response to a couple of your comments, Roshan, I think that we're very interested in looking at ways that government can help, I guess, sort of grow the sector in Australia. What we're not very good at is capacity building and hand-holding. We feel that the skills that are required aren't skills that government is so great at either, and we're still struggling with measuring our own outcomes and things like that. But things that we have looked at are sort of being first movers or cornerstone investors, and getting involved so that in some way government can alleviate the risk for other investors. And I was just wondering, for I guess all of you, how does government best get in there to, I guess, enable a market or to enable other investors when we're not great at providing the solutions themselves?
I would certainly say from our point of view that I think we play a much more constructive role, whether we're a development finance institution or a private financier, if when you find an entrepreneur that's got a business model that works and they're ready to expand, that we participate as investors and we sit on their boards and we contribute advice as a participant in the business, then I don't think it's government's place to, as a party that's supposed to represent the overall good, to be activist in shepherding individual ventures. You get into real, I mean, that's the market distortion that I was talking about that we have to avoid. Now that sometimes where we err is that where we don't give enough space for the entrepreneurs to come to us, that we try to push people. We say, oh, you're an entrepreneur and I'm going to make you do this, or you're doing this but I want you to do this instead, even though you don't want to do it. But I'm going to give you what looks like such a sweetheart deal that you can't resist, or I'm going to pressure you politically. And I can't tell you how many situations I've been involved in as a board member in, say, microfinance institutions or cooperative banks, where we're sitting on a pile of real problems because somebody said, oh, well, because we're giving you the capital, there's no risk to you, and you must do this. And I can tell you there's plenty of risk, there's plenty of cost, and then the people you want to be serving have to wait while you're cleaning up the mess. Roshan?
I think government has a great role in capacity building of people. I'm not talking about $1 million investment, I'm talking about forest of work. I'm talking about inclusive, including every small person in the big to get skill. Who can give a skill? That's government has TIBET, has schools which can give you training. A private person will charge huge amount of money. Government can, if they can partner with private sector, give good sort of skill development. Those people will be employed. You have hospitals, you have a partnership with some private sector, but get those information. So unless government gears itself and says, okay, has partnership with private sector, poor cannot be served, and it's job of government to serve poor. And capacity developments, the reach of government is the longest. Unfortunately, they have not performed. That's why we have forgotten them. But it's their job to do it, and they must do. And that's why as a public sector side, when we go, we make a program. We have a very clear idea that we will support capacity development. And unfortunately, what happens? We do not have. Once we go, sometimes what you did, it goes away because it's not sustainable. What we need to ensure that once we support something, it should become sustainable, and that's the most important job to do. Seetharam,
Well, I will reserve my comments for the last closing part, but this is a very interesting point. I'll just make one statement, is that when multilateral and international organizations and bilateral government assistances to developing countries have gone on, if you crunch the numbers in various ways, this is data of 2009 or so, for every $100 of real physical infrastructure investment that goes in, $7 to $8 is for capacity building. And if you accumulate that repetitively, annually, this kind of dollars is being spent, it's hard to measure how really capacity has been indeed built. So it's a constant challenge that while you're selling products, while you're transferring dollars for infrastructure to be invested, private companies, international institutions, all build capacity. The capacity building itself is very tenuous, so awareness, all corners have to come in. So human capital development is a long journey, and it regresses behind the actual economic wealth creation. That's why the inclusive growth and inequality set up that actually eventually emerges in the society is a constant challenge. And social enterprise has an important space, which is what I was alluding to in the beginning. We can discuss more of this, how we create social entrepreneurs, because most of them are actually building capacity while they sell a commodity, so they have a different type of mission from a typical private company who just wants to only sell goods. But Microsoft clarified that they're not just selling goods, they are into building capacity. So the global enterprises have that vision, but the individual companies cannot necessarily embrace it. So it's a constant tension between what the government should do to create the space.
Hello, my name is Annabelle and I'm a volunteer with IIX. I just had a course in school which talked about private-public partnerships, which is why I came for this talk, and it's really interesting. The perspective I want to get about is more with regards to the private sector's role in these partnerships. So, 3 parts to my question. Firstly, are there any public-private partnerships that any of your organizations have engaged in but you eventually pulled out or it didn't work out? Secondly, what were the lessons that you learned from it? And thirdly, how should the private sector, how can the private sector position itself in the future for these kind of partnerships?
Because, I mean, we're not having a conference on what people classically say, and I said this in my email when we were talking about this session. We're not talking about classic PPPs, and I think you said that in the beginning. So that's not, we're talking about social entrepreneurship and social enterprise here. So, you know, there are a number of times when we've invested in things that don't work. I mean, if you don't invest in things that don't work, you're not trying hard enough as a development finance institution, right? If 100% of our deals work out, it means we missed a huge number, and we're being too selective. And the challenge is trying to understand, and we spend a lot of time trying to crystallize lessons that we learn so that we can be wiser in the future, but we don't want to ever have a 100% scorecard. Because then you're not really pushing to try to do things that aren't obvious. And that's always going to be our role, to do what's not already obvious in the private sector. But at the same time, I mean, we can't help the public sector to create an environment where entrepreneurship is something that's admired, and not everybody wants to. There's nothing wrong with growing up and wanting to be a civil servant and serve your people. But if everybody wants to work for government, who's going to pay taxes, right? So there has to be some balance. So there has to be some balance, and in many, many countries, including OECD countries, there's a very negative view of entrepreneurship. That person's doing something very independent. They seem to be doing something that's acquiring, whether it's wealth or reputation or whatever. There's something wrong in that. That's what we have. That's what we can work through the, you know, general education and financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and government general awareness raising to change tones and recognize and reward. And that's where we as international institutions can help governments to learn what's working and what's not working, to just build a good, healthy environment. Because it's very hard to pick winners, to pick, you know, to say, I'm going to build entrepreneurs. To some extent, they're entrepreneurial because they emerge. And then, I mean, our former chief economist of the World Bank, Michael Klein, used to say the only thing, and this is a very learned economist, that he ever believed in all the literature on making entrepreneurship is that it was significant that a lot of entrepreneurs were children of entrepreneurs. You know, that's not exactly a great lesson about what we do in entrepreneurship development programs. But I think we can create awareness about the value of entrepreneurship. We can teach financial literacy in our schools. You know, we can, and then we can have systems where we look at who's bubbling up and try to let them emerge and then respond, as opposed to, that's why I'm talking about not pulling too hard and trying to play a game that I don't think we can play well in, you know, which is picking winners. But let the entrepreneurs emerge and then create structures like IIX, which can hopefully be common information structures so more people can be aware of who's bubbling up, who's doing good things, what are they about, how can I get involved. Lowering that information barrier is something that we can have a public-private partnership about between the private people that want to do that and promote a common stage for impact investing, and we in the public sector want to see more of it and want to do what we can.